For 10 days, a 16-month-old little girl was trapped inside a home, with no rescue, no voice, and no one coming. And while that child cried, weakened, and slowly died, the one person who should have protected her was smiling on a beach. This is not just a murder case. This is a story about 10 straight days of selfish choices and a betrayal so cold that even seasoned investigators said it was one of the worst things they had ever seen. There are crimes that happen in a flash, a bad decision, a burst of rage, a few irreversible seconds. This was not one of those crimes. What happened to Jalen Candelario was not a single moment of violence. It was 10 days, 10 long days, 10 separate mornings, 10 separate nights, 10 chances for one mother to stop what she had started. And 10 times, she did not. On June 6th, 2023, Crystal Candelario left her 16-month-old daughter, Jalen, alone in their Cleveland home. She did not come back until June 16th. During that time, authorities say she traveled to Detroit and Puerto Rico. When she finally returned, Jalen was unresponsive. The child was pronounced dead. The autopsy found starvation and severe dehydration. And that is the first thing this case forces you to understand. This was not confusion, not a scheduling mistake, not somebody being late, not somebody sleeping through a feeding. This was a mother leaving a toddler in a pack-and-play and walking away from the most basic responsibility a human being can have. The judge would later call it the ultimate act of betrayal. Honestly, even that sounds restrained, because betrayal almost sounds sudden. This was sustained, repeated, deliberate. Most people first heard this case in one brutal sentence. An Ohio mother left her baby alone for 10 days while she went on vacation. That headline alone was enough to explode across national media, and the reason is obvious. The facts were so extreme, they did not sound real. But that headline still leaves out what makes this case so unforgettable. It leaves out the physical reality of of what that child endured. It leaves out the fact that a neighbor's doorbell camera captured what prosecutors described as frequent screams, including one in the middle of the night, roughly 2 days after Crystal left. In other words, there is evidence suggesting Jalen was still alive, still crying, still waiting, well after her mother had already chosen herself over her child. It leaves out the investigation. Prosecutors said investigators reviewed more than 600 hours of doorbell and traffic camera footage. They pieced together movements, returns, departures, time gaps, and what emerged was not a mystery, it was abandonment. And that is where this story becomes even more horrifying. Do not just hear the headline, look closer. Because every time you look closer, it gets worse. According to prosecutors and later courtroom testimony, Jalen was left in a pack-and-play with only limited food and drink. When Crystal returned, prosecutors said the child was found in horrifying conditions, on soiled bedding, in a pen stained with urine and feces. The medical examiner said Jalen died from severe dehydration caused by caregiver neglect. At sentencing, testimony showed that the child likely suffered for days, weighed 7 pounds less than at her last checkup, and likely experienced not just physical pain, but terror from isolation and separation anxiety. The appellate record later summarized that she had resorted to eating her own feces in an attempt to survive. Take a second and sit with that. Not because shock value makes a better story, but because the audience has to understand what words like neglect and abandonment actually mean when stripped of legal language. This child did not simply pass away. She was left to decline, left to weaken, left to cry, left to search for comfort where there was none, left to die alone in a place that should have been safe. And what makes people furious is not just the ending. It is the root. Because at any point during those 10 days, Crystal Candelario could have turned around. She could have called someone. She could have told her parents. She could have knocked on a neighbor's door before leaving. Neighbors later said there were many people nearby she could have asked for help. One neighbor said they had warned her before not to leave the child alone. Another neighbor said that there were so many doors she could have knocked on, and this detail matters a lot. Her parents had taken her older daughter with them on vacation. In other words, while Jalen was left alone, Crystal had made sure another child was with family. That makes the cruelty feel even more calculated. This was not a mother who forgot she had children. This was a mother who knew exactly what care looked like because she arranged it for one child and denied it to the other. That may be one of the most devastating facts in this entire case. Not just that she left, but that she understood what protection looked like and chose not to give it to Jalen. When Crystal came back on June 16th, she found Jalen unresponsive and called 911. But prosecutors revealed another detail that made the case even more disturbing. Before first responders arrived, she changed her daughter into fresh clothes. That detail matters because it triggers the same question in every rational person's mind. Why? Why change the clothes first? Why do anything except panic, scream, and try to save the child? Why is appearance entering the picture now? Prosecutors also pointed to jail calls in which Crystal talked about what a blast she had in Puerto Rico. In another call, she minimized the death as an accident, saying it was not as though she had intentionally used a weapon. And that contrast is one of the ugliest parts of this story. A dead child at home, a vacation described as fun, a mother trying to shrink the crime. After the fact, that is not just neglect. That is moral emptiness. By the time sentencing came, even people who had seen years of violence sounded shaken. Judge Brendan Sheehan told Crystal that she had committed the ultimate betrayal. He chose life without parole, the harshest available outcome in that courtroom, saying the sentence matched the suffering inflicted on Jalen. He told her that prison would at least give her food and water, the very things she denied her daughter. Prosecutor Michael O'Malley called the crime unimaginable and described leaving a child to starve in a pack-and-play during a vacation as a new low in parental care. Cleveland Police Chief Dorothy Todd said every homicide is significant, but the death of a child is especially devastating, and she emphasized the effort to secure justice for Jalen. And then came the people who actually had to process the scene. Detective T.J. Powell called it the most horrific case of his career and read a tribute poem for Jalen. Sergeant Teresa Gomez described the details as branded into investigators' minds and said many of them were tormented by thoughts of what Jalen suffered. She said investigators would have jumped at the chance to help her. That matters. Because outrage is one thing when it comes from the public, but when hardened investigators, people who deal with death and violence for a living, say a case haunts them, You understand how far beyond normal this crime really was? At sentencing, Crystal spoke about pain, suffering, depression, and forgiveness. She said nobody knew how much she was suffering, and she said that God and her daughter had forgiven her. Her attorney argued that mental illness, anxiety, and depression affected her judgment and described her conduct as selfish, narcissistic, and the worst parenting imaginable. Her parents also pleaded for mercy. Now, this is where a lot of storytellers lose their nerve. They become so obsessed with sounding fair that they flatten the moral reality of what happened. You do not have to do that. Mental suffering is real, depression is real, anxiety is real, but none of that erases chronology. None of that erases geography. None of that erases 10 full days. None of that erases the difference between leaving one child with grandparents and leaving another to starve alone. None of that erases a beach photo, a vacation, a return flight, a dead toddler, and a courtroom, where the maximum sentence still felt barely proportionate. Those are not feelings, those are facts. One reason this case sticks so hard is that it was not hidden deep in some unreachable wilderness. It happened in a neighborhood, with neighbors, with doors nearby, with adults nearby. Neighbors described Jalen as happy and curious. They said they had told Crystal before not to leave her by herself. One neighbor said, "She could have knocked on any door." That detail expands the horror. Because this was not only about one woman's cruelty, it was also about how close catastrophe can sit to ordinary life. How many warnings can be spoken casually, teacher, before they become evidence? How can a child be physically surrounded by people and still die alone? That is what makes this story larger than outrage. It makes it unforgettable. As of the official prison record, Crystal Candelario is incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Her conviction was later upheld on appeal, and here's the truth. There may never be some satisfying psychological explanation that makes this feel less monstrous. There is no explanation that repairs 10 days. There is no explanation that feeds a starving child after the fact. There is no explanation that wipes away a dark room, a crying toddler, and a mother choosing vacation over responsibility again and again and again. We do not need access to her private thoughts to judge her choices. The record is enough. The timeline is enough. The suffering is enough. There are stories that end with a sentence. This one does not. Yes, the court sentenced Crystal Candelario to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Yes, the appeals court affirmed the conviction. Yes, the state has done what the state can do, but none of that changes. The central horror of this case, a 16-month-old child spent her final days waiting for the person she trusted most, waiting in confusion, waiting in fear, waiting in a house that never answered back. And the reason this case keeps burning in people's minds is not because it is mysterious. It is because it is clear that she was left, clear that she suffered, clear that help was possible, clear that rescue never came, clear that she was left, clear that she suffered, clear that help was possible, clear that some crimes horrify us, not because we cannot understand them, but because we understand them too well. This was not one bad moment. This was 10 days of decisions. And that is exactly why America still cannot let it go.